Very good afternoon, boys and girls. How are you all? आज हम 3 कंपनियों के बारे में देखने वाले हैं. वी आर गोइंग टू लुक अप 3 कंपनी. पहली कंपनी जिसके बारे में हम बात करेंगे वो है माइक्रोसॉफ्ट. द फर्स्ट कंपनी विच वी आर गोइंग टू टॉक अबाउट इज माइक्रोसॉफ्ट. पहली कंपनी जिसके बारे में हम आज बात करने वाले वो है माइक्रोसॉफ्ट. आफ्टर माइक्रोसॉफ्ट वी विल बी डूइंग लुकिंग इनटू गोल्डमैन सैक्स. गोल्डमैन सैक्स के साथ साथ एक और कंपनी जिसके बारे में हम बात करने वाले हैं. Starting with the first company, we'll be starting with Microsoft. एक मिनट नोटबुक्स वगैरह अरेंज कर लो मैं. चलिए, जो 3 कंपनियों के बारे में हमें बात करना है दैट इज माइक्रोसॉफ्ट. फर्स्ट इज माइक्रोसॉफ्ट, गोल्डमैन सैक्स एंड HP. राइट, स्टार्टिंग विद माइक्रोसॉफ्ट. पहले हम बात करेंगे माइक्रोसॉफ्ट की. मुझे नहीं लगता क्लास में कोई भी ऐसा एक स्टूडेंट होगा जिसे पता नहीं है इस कंपनी का नाम. There should not be a single student who doesn't know the name of this particular software, that is Microsoft. आप में से कोई ऐसा है जिसे पता नहीं है माइक्रोसॉफ्ट कंपनी का नाम? Yes, is there anyone who doesn't know the name of the company Microsoft? Very good afternoon, boys and girls. We are here with BCK Business Organization. आज हम 3 फॉरेन कंपनी का डिस्कशन करेंगे. कल हम और 3 फॉरेन कंपनी का डिस्कशन करने वाले हैं. ये तीनों भी फॉरेन कंपनीज के डिस्कशन होने के बाद देन वी विल बी कंप्लीटिंग दिस पर्टिकुलर चैप्टर. आज हम पहले जो इस कंपनी का डिस्कशन करने वाले हैं वो है माइक्रोसॉफ्ट. क्या क्लास में कोई ऐसा है जिसने माइक्रोसॉफ्ट इस कंपनी का नाम नहीं सुना है? Is there anyone in class who doesn't know about the name of the company Microsoft? क्या क्लास में कोई ऐसा है जिसने माइक्रोसॉफ्ट कंपनी का नाम नहीं सुना? क्या क्लास में कोई ऐसा है जिसने माइक्रोसॉफ्ट इस कंपनी का नाम नहीं सुना है? Is there anyone in class who hasn't heard the name of Microsoft company? सभी लोगों ने सुना है, राइट? Before I start with the lecture, can I have the attendance please? चलिए, पहली कंपनी जिसका डिस्कशन हमें आज करना है वो है माइक्रोसॉफ्ट। कल जैसे बेहतरीन, मज़ेदार और इंटरेस्टिंग लेक्चर्स आज भी मैं आपके लिए लेकर आया हूँ। सबसे पहले हम माइक्रोसॉफ्ट का जो हिस्ट्री है वो जानेंगे। हिस्ट्री जानने के बाद जिस हिसाब का हेडक्वार्टर्स कल आपने एप्पल का देखा, अच्छा लगा सबको वीडियो हेडक्वार्टर का? वॉज इट इंटरेस्टिंग इनफ? कल का लेक्चर लंबा था लेकिन कल का लेक्चर इंटरेस्टिंग था क्या? जो ऑफिस टूर वगैरह हमने कल फर्स्ट टाइम करवाया, जो फर्स्ट टाइम आप लोगों ने देखा, वॉज इट इंटरेस्टिंग इनफ? In the same manner, today also we'll have a tour of Microsoft Office. But before going on to Microsoft Office, let's have a quick reading of what is given in the text. We'll also have a quick overview of a video where we will have an entire overview of the entire chapter, right? Let's start with Microsoft. Incorporation इसका 1975 है, हेडक्वार्टर इसका वॉशिंगटन यूएस में है। प्रेजेंट चेयरमैन इज जॉन थॉमसन, प्रेजेंट हेड एंड सीईओ Satya Nadella, Chief Financial Officer Amy Hood. As we all know, this company is founded by one of the richest person in the world, that is Bill Gates. Microsoft is an American multinational company. It develops, manufactures, licenses products and sells computer software, consumer electronic and personal computer services. It is best known for software product as Microsoft Windows line of operating system, Microsoft Office suite and Internet Explorer and Edge web browsers. We all see today's world. There is been substitute for each and everything. मोबाइल की इतनी कंपनियां आ गई, इतने सारे ब्रांड्स आ गए, सब चीज़ें हो गई। आज इतने सारे पीसी मैन्युफैक्चरिंग, कंप्यूटर मैन्युफैक्चरिंग कंपनियां आ गई, सब हो गया। लेकिन एक चीज़ जो अब तक नहीं बदली वो है ऑपरेटिंग सिस्टम। मोबाइल की कंपनियां बहुत है लेकिन सभी मोबाइल कंपनियों ने एक ही कॉमन ऑपरेटिंग सिस्टम रखा है, एंड्रॉयड। ठीक उसी तरह से वन प्लस वालों का अपना खुद का है, आईफोन वालों का खुद का है, लेकिन बाकी मेजर कंपनीज, मेजर जितने भी वर्ल्ड में मोबाइल यूज होते हैं वो एंड्रॉयड सिस्टम के ऊपर इस्तेमाल किए जाते हैं। ठीक उसी तरह से कंप्यूटर मैन्युफैक्चरिंग कंपनीज बहुत है लेकिन ऑपरेटिंग सिस्टम एक ही कंपनी का वर्ल्ड वाइड चलता है, वो है विंडोज का। मैक्सिमम 90% जो पर्सनल कंप्यूटर्स है उन सभी कंप्यूटर्स के अंदर विंडोज का ही सॉफ्टवेयर होता है। जैसे मेरा ये लैपटॉप, ये जो कुछ भी आपको सेटअप दिख रहा है, ये पूरा जो कुछ भी सॉफ्टवेयर दिख रहा है, ये सॉफ्टवेयर विंडोज 10 है, विच इज ऑल्सो अ प्रोडक्ट ऑफ माइक्रोसॉफ्ट, राइट? सो माइक्रोसॉफ्ट इज एन अमेरिकन मल्टीनेशनल टेक्नोलॉजी कंपनी. It develops, manufacture, licenses, supports and sells computer software, consumer electronic and personal computer services. It is known for its best software products. Microsoft in India, Microsoft Corporation India is one of the fastest growing subsidiaries of Microsoft Corporation, the worldwide leader in software services and solutions. Microsoft India story began in 1990, where Microsoft runs 6 major business units representing entire product cycle to serve the customers from consumer to corporation, gamers to government. Microsoft Research India, Microsoft India Private Limited, Microsoft IT India, Microsoft Services Global Delivery, Microsoft Corporation India Private Limited, Microsoft India Global Technical Center. These are the 6 different subsidiaries of the main Microsoft Corporation of the USA, which operates and manages the business in India. Microsoft was founded by Paul Allen and Bill Gates on April 4th of 1975, with Gates as the CEO. Microsoft entered an operating system business in 1980 with its own version of Unix called Xenex, and however it was MS-DOS that solidified the company's dominance. विंडोज से पहले MS-DOS हुआ करता था. मुझे आज भी स्कूल में याद है, पहले हमारे यहाँ पे ब्लैक एंड व्हाइट कंप्यूटर हुआ करते थे. वो सारे ब्लैक एंड व्हाइट कंप्यूटर MS-DOS पे चलते थे. सारा कंप्यूटर ऑपरेटिंग सिस्टम या कमांड्स के ऊपर ऑपरेट किया करता था. जब मैं छोटा बच्चा था, बड़ी शरारत करता था. उस दौर में MS-DOS हुआ करता था. स्कूल की लाइब्रेरी में ब्लैक एंड व्हाइट कंप्यूटर हुआ करते थे, और उन ब्लैक एंड व्हाइट कंप्यूटर पे MS-DOS का यानी प्राइमरी जो ऑपरेटिंग सिस्टम था विंडोज़ का, वो ऑपरेट करता था. फिर धीरे धीरे बाद में ये चलन आया 2003-4 के अंदर, 4-5 के अंदर, जहाँ पर ये जो विंडोज़ का सिस्टम लॉन्च हुआ, विंडोज़ 98 लॉन्च हुआ. फिर धीरे धीरे विंडोज़ 98 लॉन्च होने के बाद धीरे धीरे सब चीज़ें आगे बढ़ती गई. विंडोज़ 98 से फिर सारे जो प्रोफार्मा है आज जैसे हम देखते हैं कलरफुल जो है वो सारे आने लगे. लेकिन उससे विंडोज़ 98 लॉन्च होने से पहले सारा जो कुछ भी सॉफ्टवेयर सिस्टम था या प्रोसेसिंग सिस्टम था, दैट वाज विथ MS-DOS, जहाँ पे पूरा कमांड डालकर ही सारा काम करते थे. और ब्लैक एंड व्हाइट कंप्यूटर हुआ करता था. इतना यूजर फ्रेंडली इंटरफेस नहीं होता. अब तो टच तक आ गए हम, राइट. However, it was MS-DOS that solidified the company's dominance. It rose to dominate the personal computer operating system market with MS-DOS in the mid-1980s, followed by Microsoft Windows. Since 1990s, it has increasingly diversified from operating system market and has a number of corporate acquisitions. Philosophy, vision to help individuals and business realize their full potential. Mission to empower every person and every organization on the planet to achieve more. Microsoft vision statement shows that the company targets market and product value. Microsoft mission statement represents global market scope of the business and general idea about the benefit of the business to its customers. However, such information is still not clearly defined to represent the business. Portfolio of the company and product and services it offers. Microsoft services in software, Windows, Office, then free downloads of Internet Explorer, Microsoft Edge, MSN, then device and Xbox. These are gaming platforms. For business, cloud platform, Microsoft Azure, MS Dynamics 365, Windows for business, for Office, Skype for business, then enterprise solutions and volume licensing. For IT developers, Microsoft Azure, MSDN, TechNet and Visual Studio. For student and educators, Office for students, OneNote in classroom and Microsoft in education, right? जैसे अभी हम ये सॉफ्टवेयर यूज़ कर रहे हैं, हमारा अभी ये जो वाइट बोर्ड में यूज़ करता हूँ, ठीक इसी तरह से OneNote का सॉफ्टवेयर है जो माइक्रोसॉफ्ट के द्वारा डेवलप किया गया है, राइट. Microsoft in news is 21st of the 500 Fortune companies, 13th in the world's largest public corporation, second in the world's best employer. Microsoft Taiwan Asia, leading the media technology company Xbox Group, jointly announced the launch of global strategic partnership to migrate the group subsidiary Xbox. KPMG expects to invest $5 billion in digital strategy and expand Microsoft alliance to accelerate professional services. So this was a small text. टेक्स्ट से ज़्यादा जब वीडियो देखोगे तो ज़्यादा समझ में आएगा. देखो मैंने इतना दिन लिया है इस चैप्टर को ख़त्म करने के लिए. पढ़ाने के लिए एक एक कंपनी रोज पढ़ाता, 5-5 चैप्टर कंपनी पढ़ा सकता और मैं 2-4 दिन में तो पूरी कंपनी खत्म कर सकता, लेकिन पूरा थॉट प्रोसेस नहीं डेवलप होता. अब इतने वीडियो पूरे लेक्चर देखने के बाद जब आप ये चैप्टर पढ़ोगे तो इस चैप्टर में कुछ नहीं रहेगा. आपको ठीक तरह से एग्जैक्टली कंपनी क्या करती है इसके बारे में अंदाजा आ जाएगा. देखो मुंह से मैं जितना बोलूंगा उसको एक लिमिटेशन रहता है, लेकिन जब आप वीडियो देखोगे तब चीजें और ज्यादा क्लियर होती है.
इस बार स्वतंत्र कीजिए अपने विचार होस्टिंगर के साथ। खरीदें वेब होस्टिंग 119 रुपए प्रति।
There's a lot of people who are forecasting that there'll be software stores just like there are record stores today, and that there'll be thousands and thousands of those. And I think I'd have to agree with that.
Microsoft. Odds are that if you have used a computer, played video games, made a video call, or just gone on the internet, then at some point in your life you have used a Microsoft product. It is this ubiquity of its products in everyday society that has led Microsoft to becoming a trillion-dollar company today. But like with most large companies, this story started out with very humble beginnings. In fact, it started out with a couple of teenagers in high school. This is the story of Microsoft. 1968 Lakeside School, Seattle. 4 teenagers at this school had drawn interest towards their school's new computers. One of these computers was called the Teletype Model 33. They wanted to use this new machine to build computer programs that could potentially allow them to do things like play tic-tac-toe or even make their own class schedules. The trouble was that you needed to rent computer usage time, which was a hefty $40 an hour. So instead of paying that $40 an hour, they decided to exploit some bugs in these computer systems in order to use the computers for free. And for a while, things were great, and these students were able to freely program whatever they wanted. But eventually, the Computer Center Corporation caught them stealing computer usage time, and the company immediately banned these students from using their computer systems. The 4 students that were banned were named Kent Evans, Rick Weiland, Paul Allen, and Bill Gates. Soon after they were banned, they decided to form their own group called the Lakeside Programmers Club in order to make some money from their programming abilities while helping companies fix bugs in their computer systems. And the club's first customer was the Computer Center Corporation, the very same company that banned them the previous year for exposing bugs in their computer systems. Several years later, a 17-year-old Bill Gates and a 19-year-old Paul Allen made a new venture together called Trafo Data, which used the newest Intel processor to turn raw traffic data into comprehensive and easy-to-read reports. The business didn't last very long because Bill Gates left to Harvard University to enroll in a pre-law program, and Paul Allen left for Washington State University to pursue a computer science degree. In 1975, Popular Electronics magazine featured a new computer called the Altair 8800 microcomputer. This was a revolutionary product that was viewed as the first commercially successful personal computer. Now, both Paul Allen and Bill Gates had caught a glimpse of the Altair issue of the Popular Electronics magazine. So the two called each other up and discussed making a basic programming language interpreter for the computer. And soon after this call ended, they ended up talking to the inventors of the Altair, who were MITS, where Gates and Allen claimed to have a working interpreter for the computer ready to go, even though this wasn't true at all. But MITS was quite interested and wanted this interpreter. So Gates immediately started working on the interpreter while Paul Allen built a simulator for the interpreter. On the way to presenting their product to MITS, the boot-up system for the interpreter still wasn't ready, so the last bit of code was actually written on the way to the meeting with MITS. And by the time they arrived at the meeting with MITS, they still hadn't run a full test of the interpreter that they had just built. So during the actual meeting, they ran their first full test where it worked perfectly. After the meeting, MITS agreed to sell Gates and Allen's interpreter product as Altair Basic. Little did the two college students know that this would be the very first product that was created by their newly named company called Microcomputer Software, known today as Microsoft. Over the next couple of years, the success of the Altair Basic made Microsoft a multi-million-dollar company. In 1980, Microsoft's revenue was nearing $30 million when they decided to open up their first international office in Japan. A year later, Gates and Allen began negotiating with the giant of the computer industry, IBM, in order to try and make Microsoft the main operating system on IBM's upcoming personal computer. Both sides agreed to a deal, but there was a problem. Once again, Gates and Allen did not have an operating system ready before making the actual deal. So what they ended up doing was buying out a standard operating system from a local computer company called Seattle Computer Products. And they bought this operating system for $75,000 and promised to pay a small royalty to the company as well. The operating system that Microsoft had bought from Seattle Computer Products was called 86-DOS, which was quickly renamed by Microsoft to MS MS-DOS. About a year later, in 1981, IBM launched its personal computer, which became an immediate success and made MS-DOS the dominant operating system in the world. And Microsoft didn't just license its operating system to IBM. It also licensed the operating system to over 70 other computer companies, including Compaq Computers. The only real computer company that didn't use MS-DOS at the time was another medium-sized startup computer company run by two other young men. That company was Apple Computers. Now, the dominance of MS-DOS ended up propelling Microsoft's revenue and valuation. However, there was one major setback. In 1983, just as Microsoft passed 1 million installs of MS-DOS, Paul Allen was diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma and decided to leave the company. Allegedly, Bill Gates thought that Allen's stock in Microsoft should be diluted at the time because he was not working hard enough and would no longer be able to contribute to the company. Regardless, Gates didn't have too much time to focus on problems outside of Microsoft, as the company was working on a word processing program called Word, a spreadsheet program called Excel, and a graphical user interface called Windows. Now, in 1983, Apple was the only major computer company that had a graphical user interface for its computers, and Microsoft knew they needed to make their own. So 2 years later, Microsoft released Windows 1.0 in order to compete with Apple's operating system. However, Windows 1.0 wasn't a complete product and gained very little popularity at the time. And it would take many years before Windows would begin to pay dividends for the company, both figuratively and literally. But we will come back to that in a little bit. On March 13th of 1986, Microsoft had its initial public offering where the company was valued at $350 million. This made Bill Gates' net worth jump to about $150 million overnight while making many of his employees millionaires. And after the IPO, Microsoft kept adding to its software product lineup by acquiring a company called Forethought, who were known for their one key product called PowerPoint. After the acquisition of Forethought, Microsoft finally felt like they had enough individual software products to launch a package of these products called Microsoft Works, which would later inspire what is known today as Microsoft Office. This package would include Microsoft Word, Excel, PowerPoint, and a few other applications. This package was also the first Microsoft product that was truly cross-platform and was available on a variety of computers like Apple Computers.
Software CEO number 3, describe your ideal relationship with Apple.
Well, we'll be selling our software independently, so the key thing is that Apple gets a lot of consistent standard machines out there quickly.
The success of Microsoft Office, along with the growth of Windows and Microsoft as a whole, made Bill Gates a billionaire. In fact, he became the world's youngest self-made billionaire in history at 32 years of age in 1987. Over the next several years, Microsoft would continue to grow, expand its product line, and release new versions of Windows every single year. And this all came to a head in 1995 when Microsoft released Windows 95 to the public. Windows 95 was viewed as a revolutionary software product for its time, and it is known by many as the birth of modern-day operating systems. It was also responsible for one of the largest marketing campaigns in computer history. Microsoft spent $300 million leading up to the launch of Windows 95, and some of their advertisements were very unique to say the least. For example, they bought 1.5 million copies of the Times and were giving them away for free. They spent money to turn the Empire State Building's lights into the colors of the Windows 95 logo. They hung a 328-foot banner from the CN Tower in Toronto. They created a 30-minute sitcom with Jennifer Aniston and Matthew Perry while making Windows 95 a primary plot point of the sitcom. And they also spent quite a bit of money licensing the song Start Me Up from the Rolling Stones and paying Jay Leno to appear at one of the most memorable product launches in history. And all of this marketing was a success, as the company sold 1 million copies of the operating system within 4 days, while doubling the company's valuation over the next couple of months. This explosion of capital allowed Microsoft to start venturing out into other areas during the 1990s. For example, 1 year after the launch of Windows 95, Microsoft launched a news channel that most of you probably don't know was 50% owned by Microsoft. The Microsoft National Broadcasting Channel, also known as MSNBC, was launched in 1996. They then created an internet browser called Internet Explorer as their standard internet browser. They invested $500 million in a new and unproven startup company called DreamWorks. They bought out nearly 10% of Apple while making Microsoft products available on Apple computers once again.
The era of setting this up as a competition between Apple and Microsoft is over as far as I'm concerned. This is about getting Apple healthy, and this is about Apple being able to make incredibly great contributions to the industry to get healthy and prosper again.
And eventually they created a few smaller subsidiaries like MSN and Expedia in 1996. Now, during this time when Microsoft was expanding into all of these other areas, their core software business was still growing rapidly. In fact, between 1996 and 1998, Microsoft's valuation had nearly quadrupled to $261 billion, while making Bill Gates the richest person in the world. However, this all came at a cost. You see, Microsoft was packaging its Internet Explorer browser with all of its Windows operating systems, while allegedly pressuring all other computer manufacturers to conform to making Windows its main operating system. This gave Microsoft between a 95% and a 98% market share of the operating system market, as well as having a similar market share for its web browser, Internet Explorer. And because of this, the United States government decided to take Microsoft to court over its monopoly-like business practices. The two sides eventually reached a settlement where Microsoft conceded that it had to open up its Windows operating system to third-party companies. The court case lasted several years and took a real toll on the company's CEO Bill Gates, who later anointed longtime Microsoft employee Steve Ballmer as the new CEO of Microsoft. Under the guidance of both Steve Ballmer and Bill Gates, who is now the chief software architect, Microsoft launched the Xbox, Windows XP, and the programming languages .NET and C#, which are used to program many websites and modern-day video games. At this point, Microsoft seemed invincible and had their hands in nearly every industry, except one: the mobile phone. Now, today you are probably using a phone that is either running on iOS or Android. And these operating systems are relatively new and weren't really created up until 2007 and 2008. But way back in 2003, Microsoft launched its mobile operating system that was called Windows Mobile. And at the time, people were predicting that Microsoft could potentially start a monopoly in the mobile phone market in a similar way to how they created their monopoly for the personal computer operating system market. But there were two things that prevented this. The first of which was that Bill Gates and Microsoft didn't think that the mobile phone market would blow up as much as it did. In fact, Bill Gates was saying at a tech conference in 2007 how people weren't going to have one single device that would do everything that you needed to do. He thought you would have one computer device for solely computer tasks, one gaming console for games, one tablet for fun, one phone solely for calling people or maybe browsing the web, and so on.
I don't think you'll have one device. I think you'll have a full screen device that you can carry around. And then you'll have the device that fits in your pocket. You'll have your living room, which is your 10-foot experience, and that's connected up to the internet. And there you'll have gaming and entertainment. And then in your den, you'll have something a lot like you have at your desk at work.
Meanwhile, someone else thought a little bit differently about the mobile phone industry. And that brings us to the second reason as to why Microsoft did not become a giant of the phone industry: Steve Jobs. You see, when Steve Jobs returned to Apple in the late 1990s, Apple was a dying company and was weeks away from going bankrupt. But slowly, with several innovations such as the iPod, iTunes, the Power Macintosh, the iMac, and the iTouch, Apple had gained significant ground in the personal computer and computer accessories market. So in the early to mid-2000s, Windows was no longer the only operating system available on the market, as Apple had a resurgence and was able to take about a 10% share of the operating system market. And because of this resurgence, Apple had enough capital to invest in a new product that could merge all of your devices into one. That was the iPhone.
Every once in a while, a revolutionary product comes along that changes everything. We're introducing 3 revolutionary products of this class. These are not 3 separate devices. This is one device. And we are calling it iPhone. Today, Apple is going to reinvent the phone.
The iPhone was released in 2007 and immediately took the world by storm. And for the first time in nearly 3 decades, Microsoft no longer had the most popular operating system in the world, nor did it have the most popular web browser in the world. This was because the likes of iOS, Android, Safari, and Google Chrome had entered the industry during that time. Now, Microsoft eventually tried to release its own smartphone in 2010 called the Windows Phone. However, they were 3 years too late, and the market was already saturated, so the phone was discontinued. Bill Gates and Steve Ballmer called missing the smartphone market as their biggest regret in business. However, they were able to create other products during that time. For example, they released Windows Vista, Windows 7, Bing, Xbox 360, Xbox Live, Microsoft Surface, Microsoft Outlook, and Microsoft Azure. They also acquired some big companies at the time like Skype and Nokia. Now, when 2013 came around, Microsoft was still worth hundreds of billions of dollars, but it was becoming more of a backseat thought to the other tech companies like Google, Apple, Facebook, Netflix, and Amazon. It was at this point that Steve Ballmer decided to step down as CEO and appoint Satya Nadella as the new CEO of the company. And right after he became CEO, the company decided to purchase a gaming company called Mojang, who are the creators of Minecraft. The company also decided to purchase the programming platform GitHub, as well as the social network LinkedIn. Now, during all of these acquisitions, Satya was laser focused on one part of Microsoft's business: cloud computing. You see, Microsoft Azure has grown at an insane rate over the last few years, like really insane. There have actually been some quarters where Azure has grown 100% in sales. And it is the growth of Azure that has made Microsoft one of the leading cloud computing companies in the world behind Amazon. Because of the success of Azure along with Microsoft's other businesses, Microsoft was able to reclaim the title of the most valuable company in the world in 2019. But it hasn't all been positive news. Paul Allen resigned from the board of Microsoft in 2000 and hadn't really spent too much time at Microsoft past this date. However, he did have several other business ventures apart from Microsoft. Like in 1997, he bought a young startup company called Ticketmaster. He also invested several $1 billion into real estate and purchased the Portland Trail Blazers and Seattle Seahawks, all of which grew Allen's net worth by billions of dollars. Unfortunately, Allen's lymphoma returned in 2009, which was treated successfully until it unexpectedly returned in 2018, where he finally succumbed to the disease. But his legacy will live on. And to think that all of this, the gaming systems, the revolutionary operating systems, the battles with the United States government, the youngest billionaire in history, the internet browsing revolution, the cloud computing giant, a major cable network, tablets, search engines, word processors, office packages, all of this was created from a couple of teenagers in a computer club. If you want to support this channel, please check out my upcoming business venture where I'm creating a video game from scratch called Attica Origins, which you can check out in the link below. Also, please subscribe to see more business documentaries like this. And for now, that's all, and I will see you guys next week.
चलो clear है सबको? Is everything clear to everyone? Now, after looking into the history of the company, now let's move on to look in the next video. We'll be having a tour of the Microsoft headquarters.
इस बार
We're accustomed to batteries keeping us online.
Microsoft is one of the most influential and high-tech companies the world has ever seen. But have you ever wondered what it's like to work there? Microsoft's sprawling headquarters is no vanilla corporate office. Instead, it's more of a miniature city with its own transit system, shopping mall, tree houses, and even a grimy lake for dunking cocky senior executives. And that's before we get into the secret underground tech labs where the very future of our online lives is being developed. Or the hallway where high fives are mandatory. So join us today as we don our trusty lanyard and delve deep inside the Microsoft headquarters. Covering an area of just over 500 acres in the Seattle suburb of Redmond, Washington, Microsoft headquarters is quite rightly known as a campus. And just like a university or college campus, it comprises dozens of buildings, over 100 all told, as well as sports fields, woodland trails, and secluded courtyards for taking well-earned breaks. The company moved onto this site, a former chicken farm, in February of 1986, just a month before going public and commencing its meteoric rise to the top of the tech sector. Initially, just 6 buildings were constructed, with a capacity of 800 employees. Today, by contrast, some 50,000 people work on the Redmond campus. Those first 6 buildings were numbered rather than named, as befits a nerdy software outfit. And that naming convention has continued right up to the present day. Employees navigating Microsoft's rambling campus using its own dedicated fleet of hybrid minibuses have to constantly keep track of what number building does what. If you're paying them a visit, chances are you'll swing by building 92 first, as it's home to the Microsoft Visitor Center. Inside, you'll find a company museum telling the rich history of the tech giant. You'll no doubt seize the opportunity to play with up-to-the-minute versions of Microsoft software like the Forza Racing series or recent acquisition Minecraft. There's also a chance to zhuzh up your LinkedIn profile, another Microsoft subsidiary, and try out the freshest gadgets Microsoft reckon will be revolutionizing your workplace in the not-too-distant future. And if you want, there's even a Microsoft apparel store with a whole section dedicated to Bing merchandise. If you visit Building 16, be sure to make your way into the courtyard, where Walk of Fame-style panels have been installed in the flagstones to commemorate the great Microsoft product launches of the past. Building 8 is where a reportedly young, shy executive by the name of Bill Gates met his future wife Melinda. The story goes that both were working overtime as per usual. Nervous Bill summoned all the courage he could muster to go say hi to the pretty girl who was also hacking away late into the night. The rest is quite literally history. A word of caution concerning Building 7. If anyone ever suggests you meet them there, be sure to politely decline, because Building 7 doesn't even exist. Though an integral part of Microsoft's internal folklore and vibrant prank culture, nobody can say for sure why there's no Building 7. Some say city permit restrictions forbade it. Others suggest the ground here is unsound. Still others imply it was just overlooked during the heady days of Microsoft's breakneck late 90s expansion. Just as mysterious in its own way, Building 87 is where some of the company's most advanced hush-hush research happens. There's no way of knowing for sure what goes on in there, but teasing references to an Orwellian-sounding Department of Human Data or the hypnotic, noise-suppressing anechoic chamber provide plenty of fuel for speculation around whatever Willy Wonka madness they're up to inside. Elsewhere, and a little more visible in terms of what it does, is the Maker Garage. Referencing the company's humble beginnings back in the Gates family's Albuquerque carport, the garage is a workshop set aside for employees to try out ideas they've been tinkering with in private. It's fully equipped with laser cutters, 3D printers, soldering gear, and every kind of tool you can imagine. The garage also hosts regular challenge nights, where staff explore the possibilities of the Internet of Things and even the futuristic science of biohacking. But it isn't all work and no play at Redmond, far from it. The campus also provides lots of opportunities for stressed engineers to unwind, including not one but 2 soccer pitches, a basketball court, softball nets, a green for playing Bulls variant bocce ball, and a handful of beach volleyball nets. There's even running trails, or if that sounds a bit too strenuous, inside several of the labyrinthine office buildings you'll encounter random pool tables and college campus classic ping pong. To help employees put in the long shifts necessary to keep Microsoft on top in a fiercely competitive marketplace, the company has provided the ultimate shared amenity. The Commons, first introduced to the Redmond campus in 2009, is a 2-story, 1.4 million square foot mall with ample retail space and dining options. Microsoft makes a point of supporting local Seattle business, which is why hungry punters who visit the Commons can sup on their Pike Place coffee as they nibble on their Flying Pie pizza. In terms of retail, there's everything here, from guitar stores to bike repair workshops, a hair salon, an auto body shop, and several cell phone retailers, although don't expect to find the latest iPhone anywhere around here. Microsoft strive to make the most of Washington State's glorious natural setting. Recently, a cluster of treehouse offices and meeting rooms were constructed on the campus, allowing staff to get up in the canopy for a refreshing lungful of inspiration. And nestled among the original clump of low-rise 80s offices is a famous body of water staff call Lake Bill, after, well, you've guessed it. According to company tradition, managers and even top-level executives like Gates and co-founder Steve Ballmer plunge into the murky pond whenever a new product launch exceeds their expectations or overcomes their initial skepticism. All this is designed to foster a culture of collaboration and a sense of family at Microsoft. And if you're lucky enough to visit the Microsoft campus yourself, be sure to play along, especially when you pass someone in the famous High Five corridor. What could be more fun than that?
How's it, guys? Interesting enough? Interesting enough? Is it interesting? Chali. The next company which we have to talk about is Goldman Sachs. गोल्डमैन सैक्स के बारे में हम बात करने वाले हैं. द नेक्स्ट कंपनी विच वी आर गोइंग टू टॉक अबाउट इज गोल्डमैन सैक्स. The Goldman Sachs Group Incorporation, incorporated in 1969. It is one of the oldest banks, one of the oldest bank into financial services of USA. इसका incorporation year 1869 का है. Headquarter is 20 West Street, New York 10282 US. Headquarters Marcus Goldman and founders are Marcus Goldman and Samuel Sachs. So Goldman Sachs, they both are the founders, so on their name, the company's name is there. CEO and chairman is David M. Solomon. Chief Financial Officer is Stephen Skier. जैसे आप लोगों ने वर्ल्ड बैंक का नाम सुना है? क्या आप लोगों ने वर्ल्ड बैंक का नाम सुना है? Have you heard about World Bank? ठीक उसी तरह से वर्ल्ड बैंक की जितना बड़ा ऑपरेशन इस कंपनी का है, जो फाइनेंशियल इन्वेस्टमेंट बैंकिंग और सिक्योरिटीज बैंकिंग या सिक्योरिटीज इन्वेस्टमेंट के अंदर काम करने वाली ये दुनिया की सबसे अव्वल या सबसे बड़ी कंपनी है. गोल्डमैन सैक्स ग्रुप is one of the leading global financial services firm providing investment banking, securities and investment management services to substantial and diversified client base that includes corporation, financial institution, governments, high net worth individuals. Founded in 1869, the firm headquarters is in New York and maintains offices in London, Frankfurt, Tokyo, Hong Kong and other major financial centers around the world. Company's history goes down. Goldman Sachs was founded in the New York in the year 1869 by Marcus Goldman. In 1882, Goldman's son-in-law Samuel Sachs joined the firm. ससुर जी और दामाद की एक कंपनी है. In 1885, Goldman took his son Henry and his son-in-law Ludwig Dreyfus into the business, and the firm adopted its present name, Goldman Sachs and Company. The company pioneered the use of the commercial paper for entrepreneurs and joined New York Stock Exchange in 1896. By 1898, the firm's capital stood at 1.6 million US dollar at that particular time. Over the years, it kept acquiring the competitive firms and companies, and by early 21st century, it became the biggest investment banking enterprise in the world. इन्वेस्टमेंट बैंकिंग एक बहुत बड़ी इंडस्ट्री है. कॉमर्स के थ्रू अगर आप जाओ तो आप इन्वेस्टमेंट बैंकिंग के अंदर जा सकते हो. सो हाउ आर करियर्स इन इन्वेस्टमेंट बैंकिंग? यू हैव टू गो थ्रू मैनेजमेंट चैनल्स, सो यू कैन हैव अ वेरी गुड करियर इन इन्वेस्टमेंट बैंकिंग. बहुत से मूवीज में देखा होगा, आप क्या कहते हो, मैं एक इन्वेस्टमेंट बैंकर हूँ. Right now, investment banker works into investment banking. For going on to that particular course, there are several degrees and all which you can go through the management courses. So, investment banking is one of the potential areas for commerce students which one can think for having a very good and extraordinary career. Then, over the years, it's kept acquiring competitive firms and companies. By early 21st century, it became biggest investment banking enterprise in the world. Philosophy: investment banking क्या है? What is exactly investment banking? मेरे दिमाग में पहले आया नहीं. पहले मैं आपको इन्वेस्टमेंट बैंकिंग होता क्या है एग्जैक्टली इसका वीडियो बताता हूं ताकि आपको इन्वेस्टमेंट बैंकिंग क्या है समझ में आए. फिर हम हिस्ट्री की तरफ जाएंगे. फिलोसफी: वी आर कमिटेड टू डिस्टिंक्टिव कल्चर एंड सेट ऑफ कोर वैल्यूज. दिस वैल्यूज आर रिकॉर्ड इन प्रिंसिपल्स व्हिच एम्फसाइज बिजनेसिंग आवर क्लाइंट्स, इंटरेस्ट फर्स्ट, इंटीग्रिटी, कंटेम्पलेंट ऑफ द एक्सेलेंस एंड इनोवेशन एंड टीम वर्क. गोल्डमैन सैक्स हैज मैनेज्ड बाय इट्स प्रिंसिपल ओनर्स. पोर्टफोलियो ऑफ द कंपनी एंड द प्रोडक्ट्स. Portfolio of the company and the products include investment management, security asset management, prime brokerage, security underwriting. It also provides banking to the institutional investors, right? Majorly security market में ये काम करते हैं. न्यूयॉर्क स्टॉक एक्सचेंज के अंदर बोला वाली है इनकी. ये जो चाहे वो सिक्योरिटी को बिका सकते हैं, जो चाहे वो सिक्योरिटी को खरीद सकते हैं. एक बहुत बड़े इन्वेस्टर्स है. Goldman Sachs ranked 16th of the Fortune of 500 companies. Goldman Sachs ranked 47th on the biggest public corporation. Goldman Global Data named top and AMN Financial Advisor US for Q1. Finance Asia Country Awards named Best International Investment Bank in China and Taiwan. Money Management Executive Top Women in Asset Management. Right? What is जैसे मैंने कहा आपको कि exactly ये investment banking क्या होती है. नॉर्मल बैंकिंग क्या होती है? एक्सेप्टिंग डिपॉजिट एंड ग्रांटिंग लोन्स, राइट। इन्वेस्टमेंट बैंकिंग एक अलग तरह का अपने आप में इंडस्ट्री है। इन्वेस्टमेंट बैंकिंग के अंदर ये कंपनियां जो फाइनेंशियल इंस्टीट्यूशंस होती है, ये स्पेसिफिकली सिक्योरिटीज के अंदर इन्वेस्टमेंट करती है, राइट। आर यू क्यूरियस टू नो एग्जैक्टली व्हाट इज इन्वेस्टमेंट बैंकिंग? डज एनीवन नो व्हाट इज इन्वेस्टमेंट बैंकिंग? किसी को पता है व्हाट इज इन्वेस्टमेंट बैंकिंग? छोटा सा वीडियो देख लो तो इन्वेस्टमेंट बैंकिंग एग्जैक्टली क्या है समझ में आएगा। इट इज वन ऑफ द हाईएस्ट पेइंग करियर्स। अगर आप चाहते हो तो इसके बारे में डिटेल बताऊं या शॉर्ट में बताऊं? एक छोटा सा वीडियो ये देखते हैं 7 मिनट का, इसे समझ में आएगा एग्जैक्टली क्या है, व्हाट आर द डिफरेंट प्रोफाइल्स एंड व्हाट आर द डिफरेंट एडवांटेजेस, व्हाट आर द डिफरेंट करियर्स वी हैव इन इन्वेस्टमेंट बैंकिंग। दिस कैन बी लुक्ड एज वन ऑफ द करियर पोटेंशियल्स।
इन्वेस्टमेंट बैंकिंग क्या होती है, इन्वेस्टमेंट बैंकर कैसे बना जाता है और कैसे इन्वेस्टमेंट बैंकर बन के आप खूब सारा पैसा कमा सकते हैं। एक ऐसा करियर है जो एक हाईएस्ट पेइंग जॉब्स में से एक है। तो ये वीडियो देखते रहना लास्ट तक, और मैं आपसे ये रिक्वेस्ट करता हूँ कि वीडियो को पूरा देखना, तभी आपको समझ आएगा, बीच में छोड़ोगे तो समझ नहीं आएगा। तो चलिए शुरू करते हैं। दोस्तों मैं प्रवीण आपका बहुत बहुत स्वागत करता हूं दिल्ली के इस यूट्यूब चैनल पे, और आज हम बात करने वाले हैं इन्वेस्टमेंट बैंकिंग के बारे में। हमने ये टर्म बहुत बार सुना है, इन्वेस्टमेंट बैंकिंग, इन्वेस्टमेंट बैंकर, क्या होते हैं ये टर्म्स। आज कंप्लीट इन्फॉर्मेशन मैं आपको देने वाला हूँ इन्वेस्टमेंट बैंक्स पे। तो उससे पहले मैं आपसे रिक्वेस्ट करता हूँ कि अगर आपने चैनल को सब्सक्राइब नहीं किया है तो आप चैनल को जल्दी से सब्सक्राइब कर लो, क्योंकि अच्छे और नए कंटेंट जो आपके लिए यूजफुल है, आपके करियर के लिए, मैं बनाता रहता हूँ, आपके लिए लाता रहूँगा फ्यूचर में भी। तो मैं आपसे रिक्वेस्ट करता हूं कि अगर आपने चैनल को अभी तक सब्सक्राइब नहीं किया तो प्लीज़ सब्सक्राइब द चैनल नाउ एंड प्रेस द बेल आइकन, जल्दी से, फटाफट। आई होप आप लोगों ने कर लिया होगा। तो चलिए बात करते हैं इन्वेस्टमेंट बैंक्स के बारे में, इन्वेस्टमेंट बैंकिंग के बारे में, और कैसे आप एक इन्वेस्टमेंट बैंकर बन सकते हैं। सबसे पहले मैं आप लोगों को बताना चाहूँगा कि हम सबको पता है कि बैंक्स क्या होते हैं। बैंक वो जगह होती है जहाँ हम अपना पैसा, अपना हार्ड एंड मनी जमा करते हैं, या हम बैंक से, अगर मुझे कार चाहिए तो मैं लोन ले सकता हूँ बैंक को अप्रोच करके, या फिर मुझे एफडी वगैरह बनानी है, फिक्स डिपॉजिट वगैरह, वो मैं कर सकता हूँ। तो ये बैंक्स होते हैं, ये कमर्शियल बैंक होते हैं जो आपको जहाँ आप अपनी सेविंग्स कर सकते हैं, लोन वगैरह ले सकते हैं। इसका एग्जांपल हो गया जैसे कि मतलब मान लीजिए एसबीआई बैंक, एचडीएफसी बैंक, पंजाब नेशनल बैंक, एक्सेट्रा एक्सेट्रा एक्सेट्रा। तो ये होते हैं बैंक्स, कमर्शियल बैंक, जिनको हम सब जानते हैं। ठीक है, यहाँ पर ग्राहक अपना या कंज्यूमर अपना या कस्टमर अपना पैसा जमा करता है, और बैंक के पास जो पैसा आता है उस पैसे पर बैंक लोन वगैरह देती है। तो ये सारा बैंकिंग, कमर्शियल बैंकिंग का मतलब काम है, हम कह सकते हैं। ठीक है, तो अब मैं अगर आपसे एक सवाल पूछूं कि एक ऐसा बैंक जो लोगों से पैसा नहीं लेता और कंपनीज को, कॉर्पोरेशंस को या बिजनेसेस को हेल्प करता है उसको उसकी फंडिंग के लिए, तो इस तरह के बैंक को हम कहते हैं इन्वेस्टमेंट बैंक, राइट। इसके एग्जाम्पल पहले से मैं आपको बता दूं, इसके एग्जाम्पल है गोल्डमैन सैक्स, मॉर्गन स्टैनली, एक्सेट्रा एक्सेट्रा एक्सेट्रा, बहुत सारे और मैं नाम नहीं लूंगा। तो ये सारे इसका एग्जाम्पल है, पर इससे पहले मैं आपको बता देता हूँ इन्वेस्टमेंट बैंक का काम क्या होता है डिटेल में, राइट। तो जैसे मान लीजिए आपकी एक कंपनी है, आपका एक बिजनेस है, आपका एक कॉर्पोरेशन के आप मालिक है, और आप अपना बिजनेस बढ़ाना चाहते हैं, राइट। तो आपने इन्वेस्टमेंट बैंक्स को कॉन्टैक्ट किया कि मेरी ये कंपनी है और मैं कंपनी के बिजनेस को बढ़ाना चाहता हूँ, तो मुझे पैसे चाहिए, या मैं कैपिटल कह सकता हूँ, मुझे कैपिटल फंड चाहिए, मैं ये भी कह सकता हूँ। तो ये सारे मतलब एक ही है, पैसा चाहिए, राइट। पैसा चाहिए आपको अपने बिजनेस को बढ़ाने के लिए, या अपने बड़ी कंपनी है तो बड़ी कंपनी, छोटी कंपनी है तो छोटी कंपनी, आपका कॉर्पोरेशन है तो आपको मेन काम आपको पैसा चाहिए बढ़ाने के लिए। तो पैसा के लिए आप इन्वेस्टमेंट बैंक को कॉन्टैक्ट करेंगे। इन्वेस्टमेंट बैंक के पास नेटवर्क होता है इन्वेस्टर्स का। इन्वेस्टर्स में आपको बता दूं, इन्वेस्टर्स का मतलब जो पैसा अपना इन्वेस्ट करते हैं, जो उस इन्वेस्टमेंट बैंक पे ट्रस्ट करते हैं और वो अपना पैसा उस इन्वेस्टमेंट बैंक पे लगाते हैं। और इन्वेस्टमेंट बैंक जो वो पैसा जो इन्वेस्टर से लेता है वो कंपनीज पे लगाता है। तो इन्वेस्टमेंट बैंक का काम क्या होता है, वो देखता है कि कौन सी कंपनी को कब पैसा लगाना चाहिए ताकि वो अपना प्रॉफिट मैक्सिमाइज कर सके, राइट। लेट्स सपोज एक कंपनी को, छोटी कंपनीज को खरीदना है, तो वो इन्वेस्टमेंट बैंक के पास जाएगा, वो बताएगा मुझे अपना बिजनेस एक्सपेंड करने के लिए इन छोटी कंपनीज को खरीदना पड़ेगा, मुझे इनको खरीदना है। अब खरीदना बातों से तो नहीं होगा ना, वो कह के भी खरीदना है तो खरीद लिया, वो उस कंपनी खरीदने के लिए उसको पैसा चाहिए। पैसा कहां से आएगा, वो अप्रोच करेगा इन्वेस्टमेंट बैंक को, इन्वेस्टमेंट बैंकर उसके पास जाएगा, इन्वेस्टमेंट बैंकर, राइट।
जो इन्वेस्टमेंट बैंक में काम करते हैं उसको कहते हैं इन्वेस्टमेंट बैंकर। अब आपको समझ आ रहा होगा, अब चीज़ें क्लियर हो रही होगी। तो इन्वेस्टमेंट बैंकर उसके पास जाएगा, उसके बिजनेस को एनालाइज करेगा, फिर वो उसको सही टाइम बताएगा कि आप इस टाइम पे खरीदिए, इतने पैसे दे के खरीदिए, डील क्रैक करवाएगा। दोस्तों आई होप आप लोगों को समझ आ गया होगा कि इन्वेस्टमेंट बैंक क्या होते हैं, इन्वेस्टमेंट बैंकिंग क्या होती है और इन्वेस्टमेंट बैंकर कौन होता है। तो मैं आपको समरी दे देता हूं अभी तक क्या मैंने बताया आप लोगों को शॉर्ट में। इन्वेस्टमेंट बैंक वो बैंक होते हैं जो कंपनीज, कॉर्पोरेशंस या फिर बिजनेसेस लाइक स्मॉल बिजनेसेस, लार्ज बिजनेसेस को हेल्प करते हैं फंडिंग में। इन्वेस्टमेंट बैंकिंग इसका काम है, इन्वेस्टमेंट बैंक का काम होता है इन्वेस्टमेंट बैंकिंग, जिसमें जो इसका काम मैंने आपको बताया वो इन्वेस्टमेंट बैंकिंग होता है। इन्वेस्टमेंट बैंकर कौन होता है? इन्वेस्टमेंट बैंकर वो होता है जो इन्वेस्टमेंट बैंक्स में काम करता है। जैसे आपके हमारे दूसरे बैंक में जो लोग काम करते हैं उसको हम बैंकर कहते हैं, जो इन्वेस्टमेंट बैंक में काम करते हैं उसको हम इन्वेस्टमेंट बैंकर कहते हैं। इसकी इतनी डिमांड क्यों है मार्केट में? क्योंकि अगर कोई एक इन्वेस्टमेंट बैंकर डील क्रैक करवाता है तो उसको उसका कमीशन मिलता है, क्योंकि डील्स हजारों करोड़ों में होती है तो उसका 1-2% भी बहुत होता है। लेट्स सपोज अगर किसी इन्वेस्टमेंट बैंकर ने 10,000 करोड़ की डील क्रैक की, 10,000 करोड़ का 1% कितना होता है? 10 करोड़ नहीं, 100 करोड़। 100 करोड़ इंटू 100, 10,000 करोड़, राइट? तो उसका 100 करोड़ का प्रॉफिट हो गया इन्वेस्टमेंट बैंक का। मैं आपको बता रहा हूँ 1%, 2% जो भी होता है, जो हर बैंक का अपना सिस्टम होता होगा, उसमें हम नहीं जाएंगे। पर क्योंकि इसमें डील्स इतनी बड़ी बड़ी होती है और इसलिए कमीशन भी बहुत ज़्यादा होता है, इसलिए हम कह सकते हैं कि इन्वेस्टमेंट बैंकर जो होता है एक हाईएस्ट पेइंग जॉब्स में से एक है। इसलिए इसका क्रेज़ इंडिया में बहुत है, क्योंकि हर कोई ज़्यादा पैसा कमाना चाहता है और इसमें गलत भी क्या है। तो दोस्तों अब मैं आपको बताता हूँ अपना हमारा आगे का प्लान। अब जो मैं वीडियो इसमें लाने वाला हूँ वो इन्वेस्टमेंट बैंकिंग पे ही लाने वाला हूँ। अगला वीडियो में मैं आपको बताऊंगा हाउ कैन यू बिकम एन इन्वेस्टमेंट बैंकर, कैसे आप एक इन्वेस्टमेंट बैंकर बन सकते हैं, या क्या क्या स्कोप है आगे, कौन कौन सी कंपनीज है इंडिया में जो इसकी बहुत डिमांड है, कौन कौन से कॉलेजेस है, कौन कौन से कोर्स करने चाहिए इन्वेस्टमेंट बैंकिंग के लिए। तो आई होप आप लोगों ने चैनल सब्सक्राइब कर लिया होगा, जैसे कि मैंने शुरू में कहा था, वीडियो शुरू होने से पहले कहा था कि आप लोगों ने चैनल सब्सक्राइब कर लेना। आई होप आपने चैनल सब्सक्राइब कर लिया होगा। दोस्तों अगर आप लोगों के कोई सवाल वगैरह है तो कमेंट्स पे लिख के मुझसे पूछ सकते हैं, मैं बहुत जल्दी रिप्लाई करने की कोशिश करता हूं और मैं हर कमेंट पढ़ता हूं और उस पर रिप्लाई करता हूं। अगर आपको वीडियो पसंद आया तो प्लीज़ लाइक द वीडियो, राइट? प्लीज़ लाइक करें वीडियो को, और जिससे आप लोग लाइक करें, मैं होप करता हूँ इस पर 100 लाइक्स तो ज़रूर आने चाहिए।
यस, अभी रेडी? ये वीडियो देखने के बाद उम्मीद करता हूं कि सभी लोगों को ये समझ गया होगा कि इन्वेस्टमेंट बैंकिंग या इन्वेस्टमेंट बैंक क्या होता है, इन्वेस्टमेंट बैंकिंग क्या होता है। जैसे हमारे नॉर्मल बैंक होता है वैसे इन्वेस्टमेंट बैंकिंग होती है। सिर्फ इन्वेस्टमेंट बैंकिंग के अंदर फर्क ये है कि नॉर्मल बिजनेस एक्टिविटीज नहीं करके हम डिपॉजिट पैसा कंपनी के पास, बैंकों के पास करते हैं, ऐसे बैंकों के पास। और ये इन्वेस्टमेंट बैंकिंग क्या करते हैं, सारा जो पैसा है कहां इन्वेस्ट करते हैं? द डिपॉजिट एंटायर मनी इनटू द सिक्योरिटीज, राइट? अभी ओके? जैसे हमारे यहाँ बॉम्बे स्टॉक एक्सचेंज है, वैसे ही यूएस में न्यूयॉर्क स्टॉक एक्सचेंज सबसे बड़ा स्टॉक एक्सचेंज, रिकॉग्नाइज्ड स्टॉक एक्सचेंज है यूएस का। और वहां पे जिस कंपनी का बोलाबाला चलता है वो है गोल्डमैन सैक्स, राइट? तो ये था कंपनी के बिजनेस को लेकर पहले जानकारी, जहां पर आप लोगों को यही पता नहीं था कि इन्वेस्टमेंट बैंकिंग क्या है। अब जाके जब आपको इन्वेस्टमेंट बैंकिंग क्या है समझ में आया तो आपको ये क्लियर हो गया कि गोल्डमैन सैक्स ऐसी कंपनी है जिसके अंदर हम जैसे डिपॉजिटर अपने पैसे इन्वेस्ट करते हैं, वो पैसे को लेकर वो सिक्योरिटीज मार्केट के अंदर ट्रेडिंग करते हैं। और उनकी जो ट्रेडिंग होती है वो बहुत हाई वॉल्यूम में होती है, जिसकी वजह से पूरा मार्केट वो हिलाने की ताकत रखते हैं। CNBC के ऊपर एक अच्छा डॉक्यूमेंट्री है जो आपको समझाएगा इनकी पूरी स्टोरी।
expected tomorrow for the Goldman Sachs initial public offering.
And I believe we share the conviction that this is in the best interest of all Americans.
We still, like all businesses, have to change and evolve.
Goldman Sachs, one of the top investment banks in the world, with a history of making money envied on Wall Street. It's the biggest of the old investment banks, with almost $1 trillion in total assets.
The allure of working at Goldman Sachs is that potentially you could be one of the people running the world.
Much admired, much hated, and, the best risk managers on Wall Street.
Everybody wanted to be like Goldman Sachs or copy it.
although it hasn't been able to climb back to its 2009 peak. It's a bank that emerged from the financial crisis relatively unscathed, financially, but its reputation took a beating.
And you want people to trust you.
From the cream of the crop to the vampire squid, now the company is targeting the regular consumer.
Goldman Sachs is going from caviar to cheeseburgers. For 150 years, Goldman served the most important people in the world, heads of state, heads of corporations, millionaires, billionaires, and now they're also serving you, the consumer.
So how did the bank get to where it is today? Goldman Sachs was founded in 1869 by Marcus Goldman, an immigrant from Bavaria. He started as a peddler in Philadelphia and then invested in a sewing machine to become a tailor. After about 20 years, Goldman moved to New York City and opened up shop as a banker. He would buy notes payable from jewelers and tanners downtown and sell them for a small profit uptown. In 1882, he brought his son-in-law, Sam Sachs, into the business, and the firm was eventually renamed Goldman Sachs & Company.
Once upon a time, firms all sort of looked a lot alike. They were all small private partnerships. The people whose names were on the door, there was really Mr. Goldman, there was really Mr. Sachs, there were 3 Lehman brothers, there were 3 Lazard brothers.
Goldman's son, Henry, joined the firm in 1885. He went on to reshape the financial world decades later. After Goldman Sachs became a member company of the New York Stock Exchange in 1896, Henry Goldman began to take over the business.
A lot of the Jewish firms like Goldman Sachs were not allowed to do certain kinds of businesses. They weren't allowed to get in the underwriting of railroads or banks, which were the huge growth engines at the beginning of the 20th century. They were allowed to underwrite retail businesses.
That's where Henry Goldman pounced. Retail firms wanted capital to expand, but they lacked the assets that industrial companies like railroads had. He developed a revolutionary idea: use a company's potential earnings, its ability to generate income in the future, to value the company. This became key to the company's first IPO in 1906, United Cigar. And it would become a model for the future, including the IPO of Sears Roebuck later that year.
He was responsible for the initial underwriting of more than 50 of our country's most successful publicly owned corporations.
And it was the next year, in 1907, that Sidney Weinberg, the future leader of the company, joined Goldman as an assistant to the janitor. He would later be named Mr. Wall Street. Through the next half-century, Goldman Sachs continued to play a prominent role in banking. It helped companies like B.F. Goodrich and F.W. Woolworth expand by going public. For Goldman Sachs, it was all about the relationships. Sidney Weinberg spent years after World War II courting Henry Ford II and helping him restructure the company he took over from his grandfather.
Their big breakthrough came in the 1950s when Goldman was allowed to underwrite the IPO of Ford Motor Company, given that Henry Ford was considered anti-Semitic. It was sort of a sea change on Wall Street. And I think after that, sort of Goldman began really to thrive. They were the first firm to house both a trading operation under a guy named Gus Levy with an investment banking operation under the infamous Sidney Weinberg. They had a return on equity of something like 75%, which is just gargantuan numbers.
Welcome. Disneyland is your land.
In 1957, Goldman Sachs led the IPO of Disney, just a few years after the company opened its theme park, Disneyland, in California.
When I started out there, Goldman Sachs was probably in 5th or 6th place in terms of being the leading firm. It wasn't really until, I'd say, the late 70s and early 80s when Goldman Sachs, because of its client activity in investment banking, the deals it did and so on, began to get the reputation for being the gold standard of the investment banking business. I think a commitment to excellence and professional ways of doing things, a very low tolerance for sloppiness, and a lot of attention to detail, and that started this whole talk about culture. The Goldman culture was different from others. To some degree it was, although that difference faded away to some degree when the trading era got going.
When Gus Levy, who ran the trading business, took over the firm as senior partner in 1969, Goldman Sachs started taking on more risk.
When you're a private partnership, they're making bets with their own money, and that absolutely helps them sort of mitigate extreme risk-taking and make sure that the firm is prudent overall. Because if the firm goes under, it's the actual partners whose names are on the door, whose capital is in the firm, their money is going to be lost.
But as investment banks started going public in the 1970s, things started to change.
All of a sudden you go from a partnership culture to a bonus culture on Wall Street beginning from 1970, and now we're coming up in 50 years of this kind of shenanigans, 50 years of people getting rewarded for essentially taking big risks with other people's money.
The traders were street smart, sales oriented, pat you on the back and let's go to the next game types, often using ideas for trading that came from a bunch of PhDs that were locked in a cage somewhere. But it was a different setup from the investment banking groups who thought of themselves as more the intellectuals.
In 1981, Goldman Sachs acquired a commodities trading firm, J. Aron & Company. It marked a strategic shift in the business for the bank, and future leaders like Lloyd Blankfein and Gary Cohn rose through the trading ranks.
A lot of the leadership of the firm moved from the investment banking sector to the trading sector.
The 1980s saw the rise of private equity on Wall Street. Power brokers dominated culture, and Goldman watched some of its biggest competitors rake in big dollars by going public. Bear Stearns in 1985, Morgan Stanley in '86, and then Lehman Brothers in 1994. Goldman made some massive deals, like the purchase of Rockefeller Center in 1995, but the company stayed a partnership.
I joined in the summer of '95, and I say I was very fortunate because I think I was something like only the fifth person ever that had joined as a partner when it was a partnership. So I felt a little bit scared because of I was coming into this remarkable partnership and had no idea what it would be like. I'll never forget the second day I was there getting an email from John Corzine, who was of course the CEO, asking me what I thought of the lira, and I was shocked. And I gave him an answer, and he answered me back within half an hour. I thought, wow, this is a pretty cool place. Actually, within 3 months of me being there, they had the first, what became pretty well known, big debate amongst all the partners about whether they should or shouldn't go public, and the decision was no.
For a long time, it was felt that, Goldman was special, would be better off private. Over time, frankly, people who were there at Goldman, they would never say it quite this way, but they got greedy. They realized if they could go public at 4 times book value, they all stood to make a ton of money and get really, really rich. There was really no reason at all for Goldman not to go public.
Because it had got so big anyhow, the idea that it behaved with exactly the same philosophy as the original spirit of the partnership seemed to me to be not as true as the value of the partnership suggested. So I'm like, well, why not just become a public company?
A big debut expected tomorrow for the Goldman Sachs initial public offering. The IPO is 10 times.
It was one of the biggest IPOs in history at the time, and the company raised $3.7 billion. It made the partners unbelievably rich.
Top partners at the firm probably made something like $300 million. Even less senior partners made something like $100 million. So it was a huge payday across the firm. It was a bonanza. It was a smashing success.
Thinking about it nearly 20 years later, I wish GS would have retained some of the more genuine strength of what being a partnership forced them to be, because at the end of the day, it was our own capital that was at risk.
Of course, while all this was going on, Goldman's increased influence extended beyond Wall Street and into politics. After senior partners raked in all that money, many of them asked, what's next?
A lot of them were still young. They now claim, wanted to give something back. In truth, what they wanted to do is they made all this money on Wall Street. Now they wanted to have power. And if you want to have power, you have to go to Washington. So that led to people like John Whitehead, senior partner at Goldman, going to work for Ronald Reagan, Bob Rubin, becoming first the National Economic Advisor for Bill Clinton. Steve Friedman, who was also Rubin's co-senior partner at Goldman, also became a National Economic Advisor. Rubin, of course, became Treasury Secretary. Steve Mnuchin, current Treasury Secretary, is a Goldman guy, former Goldman partner Gary Cohn, of course, and it just became part of the culture, part of the DNA.
These men have had significant influence on banking policy over the last 25 years. Rubin was part of Bill Clinton's team that deregulated the banking sector in the 1990s. Gary Cohn was one of the architects of Donald Trump's corporate tax cuts. And of course, Henry Paulson was the Treasury Secretary during the financial crisis of 2008, proposing the $700 billion bank bailout. But we'll get to that later.
And some people say, well, Goldman Sachs is government Sachs, where they endure. No, they just have a lot of smart people, and smart people tend to wind up in positions of power. So what does that mean, that cachet? It means there are 1 to 2 degrees of separation from the most important people in the world. Heads of states, head of corporations.
Government Sachs, in my book, is a moniker that's well earned. When people push back and say Government Sachs isn't really a thing, I say, is there any other Wall Street firm who sent more people into government than Goldman Sachs? And the answer is no.
Business boomed after the IPO. The company was making about $2 to $3 billion a year from 1999 through 2003. By 2007, that profit number crossed $10 billion.
It's a tale of 2 decades since Goldman Sachs went public. In the first decade, they crushed it on almost any measure. Earnings growth, book value growth, return, stock price outperformance, fantastic. But to a degree, they were a victim of their own success.
The company divided its revenue into three main categories. Investment banking, providing services to companies and governments when they do things like issue bonds, merge, or of course, IPO. Asset management, advising clients on investing their money. And we're talking about very, very wealthy clients, like people with $10 million in the bank. And finally, trading and investments, the bets the company is making in the market. In 2007, it was that sector, those market bets, that made more than $13 billion for the company, 75% of the company's pre-tax profits. Goldman was the darling of Wall Street.
As somebody who wrote a book about Goldman, I understand how they make money from investment banking. I understand how they make money from asset management. But in many ways, it's still a big mystery how they make as much money as they did.
Welcome to Today on a Friday morning. I'm Matt Lauer.
And I'm Meredith Vieira. And if you thought the markets couldn't get any worse, you may be in for a rude awakening.
This was the wildest single day in the history of Wall Street.
We're faced with the prospect of a global meltdown.
Goldman Sachs figured out before other firms that trouble was coming. They began to figure out in December of 2006, and they made a big proprietary bet against the mortgage market. Now, that's my words. They say they were hedging their risks. By the time the summer of 2007 came around and the Bear Stearns hedge funds had collapsed, Goldman made an absolute killing. $4 billion in profit. Goldman has always prided itself on being the best risk managers on Wall Street, and I think the financial crisis proved that.
The week after longtime competitor Lehman Brothers went bankrupt, Goldman got a $5 billion investment from none other than Warren Buffett.
Now, I have no idea what the stock market's going to do next month or 6 months from now. I do know that the American economy over a period of time will do very well, and people that own a piece of it will do well.
When you had other financial firms literally failing, I mean, remember, you had Lehman Brothers, and you had Bear Stearns, you had a bunch of others that failed. Goldman Sachs was strong, and they were so strong that coming out of the financial crisis, they dominated the trading activity. And so, like, Goldman Sachs is on top of the world.
You know, to their credit, Goldman Sachs really killed in 2009, making more than $30 billion in trading, an amount of money that Wall Street might never see again.
They really put the hurt on their competitors, and I think create a lot of resentment in the marketplace and in public opinion as a result of that.
Of course, it didn't help that former CEO Henry Paulson, who was Treasury Secretary at this point, was the person proposing $700 billion in taxpayer money to bail out the industry.
This troubled asset relief program has to be properly designed for immediate implementation and be sufficiently large to have maximum impact and restore market confidence.
It also didn't help that CEO Lloyd Blankfein defended the company in an interview with the Times of London, saying he believed the firm was doing God's work.
That it's because that so many of the cultural realities of what you all do is jarring to most Americans. This notion of selling a product that you're betting against is hard for people to understand.
The crux of the critique came down to this. Goldman Sachs was structuring mortgage-backed securities in its investment banking unit and selling them to clients. But at the same time, the trading side of the firm was betting against those deals.
Look what your sales team was saying about Timberwolf. Boy, that Timberwolf was one deal.
There was a spotlight that shined on Goldman Sachs, and Main Street didn't know who Goldman Sachs was. And Goldman Sachs not handled that as well as they should have. They didn't explain to the public. When Goldman Sachs management testified to Congress, it came across as a little stilted and defensive.
Do you think you have an obligation to tell the person that you're selling that security to in that deal that you are keeping the short position in that deal? That's my question.
That we're not going to cover it in the market?
That's correct. Well, no, that you intend to keep that short position. Not forever. It's your intention to keep that short position.
No, I don't think we would have to tell them. I don't even know that we would know ourselves.
It was great political theater. People needed a scapegoat, and Goldman provided an easy target for a scapegoat.
Goldman Sachs ended up paying more than $7 billion in settlements surrounding its handling of mortgage-backed securities in the run-up to the financial crisis. That's according to KBW's bank litigation tracker. However, in true Goldman fashion, the company figured out how it could make money, even on what most thought were government fines. Here's how they did it. As part of the settlement with the Department of Justice, Goldman agreed to provide $1.8 billion in consumer relief. But Goldman Sachs doesn't have a mortgage business, so they couldn't simply let delinquent borrowers stay in their homes. Instead, the company bought pools of distressed mortgages from Fannie Mae and restructured them. They got to count that towards their fine, but they can still potentially make money off the assets.
It's hard to think of anything more Goldman-esque, which is for them turning a penalty into a money-making opportunity. Which feeds just into this long-standing narrative about Goldman Sachs, which is, that these guys are the smartest guys in the room. The flip side of that is that their reputation is that they are sharks.
When we asked Goldman Sachs about the strategy, they directed CNBC to the Independent Monitor's report on the settlement. As of February 2019, the Monitor validated almost $1.3 billion in relief, 71% of the way to fulfilling the settlement. Goldman Sachs wouldn't comment on whether it's making a profit on the strategy. And the financial crisis is not the only scandal to hamper Goldman in the last decade. In 2012 and 2013, the bank arranged 3 bond deals in Malaysia to fund a state investment fund called 09.BUSINESS. It raised $6.5 billion to attract foreign investment. But according to U.S. authorities, it was just a front. They accused a Malaysian financier of stealing billions from the fund and paying hundreds of millions of dollars in bribes.
Today's case is the largest single action ever, brought by the department's Kleptocracy Asset Recovery Initiative.
When you talk to people on Wall Street about making $600 million on 3 bond deals, everybody scoffs at this. This is an insane amount of money to make on bond deals that are supposedly fairly plain vanilla. The very highest levels of the company, maybe if they didn't know what MDB was perhaps something suspicious about that, well, maybe they should have dug a little harder and maybe they should have found out.
The investigation into the firm's culpability is ongoing as of April 2019. Goldman Sachs told CNBC senior management was unaware of the criminal activity by Mr. Leisner and his associate, who took extraordinary efforts to hide their part in the illegal scheme. Despite the legal issues, Goldman's advisory business still crushes its competitors on Wall Street, but its trading business has lagged.
So Goldman Sachs has gone from great to good. Look at the first decade versus the second decade. They were number 1 in trading, and then they went to number 3 in trading. The lead has narrowed somewhat, and the stock price, the valuation is the lowest that it's been since they've been a public company in a non-crisis period.
All of this has prompted one of the most interesting pivots in Wall Street history.
But if you think about the brand and the way the regulatory environment has changed who we are, it makes sense for us to have direct relationships with consumers.
In 2016, the company launched a new product called Marcus. Remember him? It's a digital bank that provides personal loans and high-yield savings accounts.
Okay. What is it that Goldman's is offering in their bank account that I can't get elsewhere? It's that slightly higher savings rate.
The pitch is we are a new bank, we're a new approach, we're not going to nickel and dime you on fees, we're going to be very transparent, we're going to be very clear to you about how we make money, and this is sort of the new way of doing fintech these days.
To be clear, this is still a tiny part of Goldman's overall business, but the trend of investment banks starting to look more like commercial banks is real. In a post-financial crisis world, diversification is important. Goldman said it had $46 billion in online retail deposits across the US and the UK. That's pocket change compared to competitors like Bank of America or JP Morgan, with more than $1 trillion in deposits each. But it's seen as a growth opportunity.
None of this is going to fundamentally change Goldman Sachs, who we are, how we're making money in the short term, but we think we can build very successful platforms that over time will make a meaningful contribution.
Goldman Sachs is going from Wall Street to Main Street, and look at how they're doing this. They're doing this with more technology, more like Silicon Valley.
Today, we're introducing a brand new service, and we call it Apple Card.
There was an opportunity that I think Apple saw and we saw to redesign certain aspects of the credit card.
They're doing this with a younger workforce. 3/4 are millennials or younger. They're doing this with a more relaxed dress code, and they're doing this with a CEO who's a part-time DJ. Look, the jury is out on the effectiveness of this new path. A lot of us are watching.
If history is any guide, Goldman Sachs will find a way to make money.
पूरा डिटेल में तो वीडियो समझना मुश्किल है, लेकिन मोटा मोटी आइडिया समझ चुके होंगे कि एग्जैक्टली ये कंपनी जो है गोल्डमैन सैक्स से एग्जैक्टली करता क्या है और इन्वेस्टमेंट बैंकिंग होता क्या है और कितना सिंपल है.
JP Morgan is right now the biggest bank in the United States, probably in the history of the United States.
JP Morgan.
Over the last century, of the notable bank mergers that have taken place, JP Morgan and its predecessors.
Is it a little bit clear, guys? आया ना? Yes or no? समझो क्या? Are we a little bit clear about the company? कंपनी को लेकर क्लियर है हम. चलिए, moving on to the last company for today, that is HP. उम्मीद करता हूँ HP एक कंपनी के बारे में एटलीस्ट सभी लोगों ने सुना होगा। कंप्यूटर और कंप्यूटर रिलेटेड इंस्ट्रूमेंट्स बनाने वाली कंपनी है। Has everyone heard about the name of the company HP? हिंदुस्तान पेट्रोलियम ने बोला, ये HP अलग है, ये फॉरेन का HP है जो कंप्यूटर और हार्डवेयर बनाती है। HP कंपनी का नाम सभी लोगों ने सुना है। Has everyone heard about the name HP? HP इस कंपनी का नाम सभी लोगों ने सुना है क्या? हाँ या ना? Yes or no? Yes or no? Yes or no? चलिए, लेट्स स्टार्ट डिस्कसिंग अबाउट द लास्ट कंपनी दैट इज HP। इनकॉर्पोरेशन ईयर इसका जो है वो 1939 में है। दिस कंपनी वाज फॉर्म्ड इन द ईयर 1939। हेडक्वार्टर ऑफ दिस कंपनी इज इन कैलिफोर्निया, US। Chairman of this particular company is Chip Berg. Present head and CEO is Enric Lores and Chief Financial Officer is Steve Filler. कंपनी की इंट्रोडक्शन की अगर हम बात करें, Hewlett Packard is an American multinational, इसका फुल फॉर्म है HP का, Hewlett Packard. Hewlett Packard is an American multinational information technology company. It develops and provides a wide variety of hardware and components as well as software related services to consumers, small and medium sized business and large enterprises including customers in the government, health and education sectors. ये US की one of the leading hardware और software नहीं, majorly hardware manufacturing company है। जितने भी PC वगैरह का जो भी हार्डवेयर है इसका मैन्युफैक्चरिंग का काम है। कंपनी की अगर हम हिस्ट्री की अगर बात करें, द कंपनी वाज फाउंडेड इन द ईयर 1939 in one of the car garage in Palo Alto by William Bill Langdon Hallett and Dave Packard, and initially produced a line of electronic test equipments. Philosophy of the company stands as to create a technology that makes life better for everyone, everywhere, every person, every organization and every community around the globe. HP के लैपटॉप आते हैं, HP के डेस्कटॉप्स आते हैं, HP के हार्डवेयर के अंदर प्रिंटर्स आते हैं। ऐसे बहुत सी चीज़ें हैं जिसमें HP हार्डवेयर में और सॉफ्टवेयर में काम करता है। मेजरली काम इनका हार्डवेयर के अंदर है। पोर्टफोलियो ऑफ द कंपनी ऑफ द प्रोडक्ट्स एंड सर्विसेज इट ऑफर्स। HP मेजर प्रोडक्ट लाइन्स इंक्लूड्स पर्सनल कंप्यूटिंग डिवाइसेस, एंटरप्राइज एंड इंडस्ट्री स्टैंडर्ड सर्वर्स, रिलेटेड स्टोरेज डिवाइसेस, नेटवर्किंग प्रोडक्ट्स, software and diverse range of printers and other imaging products. HP marked its products to household, small, medium-sized business enterprises directly as well as online distribution, consumer electronics and office supply, electrolyers, software partners and major technology vendors. Business and news की अगर हम बात करें, in 2014 HP announced plans to split PCs and printers business from its enterprise business. HP ranked 109 on Fortune of 500 list of companies. HP ranked 432 on the Forbes World's Largest Corporation, 393rd on the World's Best Employer in 2019. The company has committed $20 million over 5 years to develop water-based ink technology for printing digitally on corrugated packing and textiles. Then HP has launched the world's first notebook with ocean sound plastics in September 2019. This is a small introduction of the company. इसके बारे में एक वीडियो है इंटरेस्टिंग, वो देखेंगे, फिर आज का लेक्चर हमारा यहाँ पर कंप्लीट हो जाएगा.
There's the story of two people in a garage on Madison, and they were tinkering on the weekend, and they're engineers, and they built this billion-dollar company.
Bill and Dave encouraged people to be brave enough to take the risks and think as large as possible.
These guys built a process that invited, accepted, and rewarded innovation. There were multiple people in every department of the company doing innovative things.
The essence of the HP way. Top management sets the overall objective and then gets out of the way and lets the people do it.
HP set the standard for the rest of us. They became, in my mind, the icon of what business ought to be.
At some point, we decided that we were going to try and form a company and go ahead.
And we wanted to find a house and a garage that we could use for a shop.
The story is that Dave and Lucille lived in the bottom half of the house, and Bill had a little shack in the back.
I brought the drill press and some other tools in the back of the car, and we set up the shop there.
They started the company on about $500 and a good idea, and believe me, it showed.
We started out, of course, baking our panels in Lou's oven, and then we decided we want our own oven, so we bought an old refrigerator unit because it had good insulation. Well, it got so hot that it caught fire, and the fire department came and put it out. Otherwise, we would have lost the whole works.
Yeah.
What got Hewlett-Packard really going was the first big order, and that came from Walt Disney for the movie Fantasia. They needed really good sound. And the audio oscillator, which was the first HP product, was the best device in the world for that.
And simply produces a variable tone. You can hear what it sounds like. And that's just part of the range.
We put together a set of specifications, a little sales pitch that Lou typed out for us.
Remember how we priced it?
Yeah. We didn't have any idea about pricing in those days, and I guess we started out with $54.50, wasn't it?
$54.40 or fight.
$54.40 or fight, something like that.
The genius was not that they had all of the perfect tools, but that they had a drive and an energy and an entrepreneurship, a creativity.
Two people in a garage with very little resources can create the next big thing. So HP was really the inspiration, I think, for the entire valley. It's no question.
The company was formed in a different way from most modern companies. It was formed out of friendship. These are two guys that just got along well together and decided to build a company, and then they figured out what they'd build after they got it going.
Our primary interest was to bring some money in the door. We tried all kinds of things. We tried building shocking machines to make people lose weight, a device to tune harmonicas.
Hewlett had an idea about an electric urinal flusher. In fact, when I go into a modern men's urinal these days, I kind of think of Bill.
They did an automatic lettuce picker for the fields.
They built a bowling alley foul line indicator.
We invented, we swept the floors, we kept the books. We've done every job in the place, so to speak.
They were roll-up-your-sleeves guys. They were can-do people.
Dave Packard was a lot more outspoken. Dave was a big guy. He was 6'3" or 4". He had a finger that would get longer and longer as he waggled it at you. So he was a pretty forceful personality.
Now, Hewlett was more likely to be deeply involved in the technical issues and the technical side of the company, and Packard was more likely to be involved in the financial sides of the company. But you couldn't depend on that because you never knew who was going to pop up.
They'd have done terrific things, I think, by themselves. But together, they were extraordinary.
There's this wonderful moment in the company's history. I think it was 1948. And he was at a meeting of business leaders.
There were a whole bunch of CEOs from companies there, and the question that was raised, who is the company responsible to?
And they're all talking about the most important thing is you have to actually focus on returning dollars to your shareholder and maximizing profits.
That's a business model in which the human being is a replaceable part in the manufacturing assembly process.
David Packard stands up and says, actually, I respectfully disagree with all of my elders.
You also have an obligation to your customers and to your employees and to the community in which you operate.
A purpose of a company is not to make money. It makes money in order to be able to do what it's really all about. And in our case, that's to make a contribution.
They laughed at him.
We're here to create things that if we didn't create them, the world would be worse off. And if you don't understand that, you don't understand the HP way.
The thing that I fell in love with was there was an immense pressure
to make a contribution. That was the key phrase, that you had to make a contribution. That you didn't just bring out a product because you thought you could make money on it. You brought out a product because you thought there was some dimension in which it was significantly better.
What this really means in this sense is not to be a me too, but to not go into some area unless you feel that you've got something really to contribute. Because if we just try and follow someone, you're always going to be at the tail end.
Dave and Bill expected good performance, and everybody pulled an oar to make a contribution. Everybody was proud of the company and the fact that we were really doing something worthwhile.
The best measure of whether we do or do not make a contribution is whether we can market that product at a profit. In other words, whether it's worth more to the customer than it costs us to make.
He realized that if the company didn't make a profit, they wouldn't be able to make a contribution in science and technology. They wouldn't be able to take care of their employees. They wouldn't be able to give back to the community in terms of philanthropy.
HP was a business, and these men were dedicated to increasing revenues and increasing profits. After that, all the good things followed. But their first job was to build a great company, and they fought hard to do it.
We had all kinds of social things going all the time. We had our annual picnics. Dave and Bill would join right in. Just being real human beings.
Bill and Dave would be flipping the steaks, and then the head of finance and the head of marketing and the head of personnel, they'd be serving the salads.
Even when there were thousands of employees, it would be unlikely that Dave wouldn't know somebody in a particular work group. How's your child? Did your father recover? There was a very close relationship.
It's part of the informal atmosphere that made us much more effective than a rigid hierarchy would have permitted. We're more like part of a family.
It was a company that cared enormously about its employees. And how can you beat that?
You weren't just building a product, you were building a company of people.
Lots of our employees were good friends. In fact, I remember making the comment that most of the best friends I had were working here in the company.
The first time I met Dave Packard was in 1952. I hadn't been with the company very long.
We showed up in the lab at about 6 o'clock or so, and I was still taking measurements.
And we were having trouble with a particular device, an attenuator, and I became aware of this big man sitting next to me on the stool.
He got behind me and said, "Hey, Art." He said, you take the readings and I'll write it down on your notebook.
I moved over and he tested some of these things, and he said, "You know, you're right. They're not passing."
So we worked past midnight taking data. We are working more like companions than boss.
The most important thing about these guys is you never felt that they were separating themselves from the employees.
We'd built up this feeling of a small company in which you had personal knowledge of really everything that was going on.
What we've tried to engender is this attitude that it's everybody's business to do a good job. Hopefully we'll all benefit if we do so.
It was just something magic. Designing the products, laying them out, doing the software. And we're all part of the same thing and working together. And, you know, as long as we're working, we take care of each other. And, boy, that sure influenced my thinking.
One day the phone rang and Hewlett says, "T, we got this calculator going on at HP Labs." So I went up and talked to Bill. He gave me the market research report that suggested that we shouldn't do it.
But at the time, the state of the art was a slide rule. And so to go from slide rule to calculator was a quantum leap in functionality.
The bottom line was, well, Bill, we're sorry. We don't think there's a market for this product. It's very complicated, and it's going to cost $350.
20 times more than a slide rule. And Bill said, "I want one of these things."
Bill challenged his engineers to build this thing and make it the size of his shirt pocket.
That was kind of, oh my God, I don't think we can possibly do that.
But they made a big pretense of making sure that whatever they built would fit into his shirt pocket.
And we came up with 4 pages of names for this thing. Captain Billy's Whiz-Bang Machine was one of the names. The Mathed Marble. We had a whole bunch of names. And there was not a winner in here. And we said, well, it's got 35 keys on it, so we'll call it the HP 35.
When I was in college, the HP 35 calculator came out.
And, oh, I just drooled seeing that thing.
It was, like the skies parted.
I remember waiting in line to get one of these things. People were selling their cars.
We spent the next 18 months up to here with orders and trying to keep up with the demand for the darn thing. But Bill was willing to take a risk, and boy, was he right.
We went from a specific, fairly small type of company and laid the groundwork to expand into a larger domain.
I think Dave and Bill saw very clearly that we really had to be an international business.
The market for electronics was a worldwide market. Why confine it? Hewlett insisted that we ought to have not only overseas sales, but factories overseas.
We are really serving a worldwide need. It's just the simplest way to express it.
Dave and Bill, in looking at the international market, saw it as a place to go out and get more of the best minds in the world. So they always viewed it as a source of talent. And the HP way makes each of those branches feel as though they're amongst the best in their part of the world.
If you went into a facility in Germany, the environment would be very similar to what you'd find in Palo Alto.
To learn how to call the boss by the first name was very difficult for the Germans to accept because formalism in Germany was tough, but they all learned how to do that.
その両方のアメリカの文化と日本の文化が全くミックスするって言いますかね、ごちゃごちゃになっていると、上位形と言いますか、特に下からの意見を非常に言いやすいということが言えました。これは日本の他の会社とは大いに違うところだったと思います。
No matter what culture you were in, could be in Asia, could be in Europe, could be in the United States, that was a universal feeling on the part of the employees that they were honored and that they were respected.
I believe it's very important that people have some part in making the decisions that they're going to be involved with. They're going to be much more effective in implementing those decisions.
The essence of the HP way, plain and simple, top management sets the overall objective and then gets out of the way and lets the people do it.
They had a slogan: decisions should be made at the lowest possible level. Dave used to say that.
A rank doesn't matter, titles don't matter, which degree you have and from which school doesn't matter. It's, are you part of this team and what can you contribute to it, and are you doing your job?
They encouraged people to be brave enough to take the risks and think as large as possible.
Trust the people, give them the tools, hire the best people, get stuff done.
This was what HP did. It trusted people to do the job. And you stepped up. You really stepped up. It scared the hell out of you. Made you into a better person.
I built a large screen oscilloscope that could be used as a computer display. My bosses weren't all that wild about it, but they let me show it to Dave and Bill. And Dave told my boss, when I come back next year, I don't want to see this in the lab. When he came back a year later, the project is in production. He was incensed and said, I thought I said to kill this thing. I said, no, sir, what you said was you didn't want to see it in the lab. It's not, it's in production. The market forecast was for 31 of these things. Over time, we sold 17,000 of them. Most importantly, it was used for you to see Neil Armstrong's foot hit the moon.
The thing was successful, and Dave had the humility to say, and the self-confidence to say, I was wrong.
So I have here a Medal of Defiance in recognition of extraordinary contempt and defiance beyond the normal call of engineering duty. Dave wanted to make a statement that maverickness is expected in a way. So these guys built a process that invited, accepted, and rewarded innovation.
So Dave and Bill were people who just loved and benefited from change. It didn't matter how big HP got. To them, change was something that they always looked at and said, where is the opportunity?
This company, in 60 years, morphed itself 5 times. It was a voltmeter company, and then a microwave company, and then a handheld calculator company, and then a computer company, and then an ink company.
The HP way could accommodate so many different business models over decades and decades of time, but they were flexible enough to know that you apply those principles in different ways as conditions require it.
You can continuously change as long as your heart's intact. as long as your core values are there. And if you've got the right values, then out of that will constantly emanate that innovation. And that's always been the power of Hewlett-Packard.
It's no exaggeration to say that Bill Hewlett and Dave Packard created Silicon Valley. Big time. And they respected and appreciated other entrepreneurs. Everything I learned about entrepreneurship was taught to me by Dave Packard.
There were many bright people who left HP and founded their own companies, and they carried away the fundamentals of the HP way.
There was an ad run in 1962 that said, you want to be an entrepreneur? Come here first and learn how. And it's like, that's a weird ad. You're encouraging people to go elsewhere. But Bill and Dave's attitude was, that's great. And they seeded this valley with some of the greatest talent you can imagine.
I even turned down starting Apple once. I refused to go to Atari because Hewlett-Packard was my company for life. The morale was so high, I never saw anything like that, just the happiness of everyone working with each other.
A lot of people say that the HP way is anachronistic, that fit in a different world, a simpler world. But in fact, it may be more relevant today. And that's because when your employees are scattered all over the planet, people are working independently, you have to trust your employees more than ever before. And that's what Bill and Dave did. They set the model for it.
So you ask what kind of people were they? They were giants. They really were. They're just amazing people.
It's hard to find anyone in the history of business who's been able to create more, both in terms of business success and in terms of the culture and the type of company that's respected all over the world. That in and of itself is a pretty amazing story.
We hope that the people that will follow us will have the same ideas. Now, they're not going to be exactly the same, but I don't think that a lot of these fundamental positions are going to change very much. They're too ingrained in the organization.
We have a great many very capable people, and I think basically agree with this philosophy, and I think this in itself is going to provide some assurance of continuity.
It's very easy to fall back on celebrating Bill and Dave. But the story of HP is the story of HP people. Bill and Dave wisely created the environment for this efflorescence of human talent. But it's the HP people who spread that trust around and lived the HP way that made this company a great company.
Listen, there's this story of two people in a garage on Addison, and they were engineers, and they built this billion-dollar company. So I sort of think that a company, no matter how much you want to say that it's dynamic and reacts to market forces and all that, the DNA is set by the founders. And that DNA, you couldn't kill it if you tried.
I don't think it's useful to spend much time looking at the past. I think we ought to spend most of our time looking at the future, because that's where we're all going to be.
There's this story of two people in a
एक 2 मिनट सभी लोग वेट करें, जस्ट वेट फॉर 2 मिनट्स. लग रहे हो या सो गए हो? लस्सी जो चूड़ा देने वाला मेरे को फटाफट लाके दे दो. मेरा अभी का पहले का स्टॉक खत्म होने को आ गया. आज इतना पैकेट भर के आया था मेरे को वट्टमवार अंकल के पास से, वो भी खत्म हो गया. आर्यन वट्टमवार, ईशा वट्टमवार, हर्षदा फड़कनकर, और कौन बचा रे भाई? और कौन था वट्टमवार बचा? और कौन बचा? रेवन मारा. तो समझ में आया सारा कंसेप्ट? तीनों कंपनी के बारे में समझ में आया? और शशांक एक और, रोज का अल्टरनेट मंगाना पड़ता. तीनों कंपनी समझ में आए? किसी को कोई डाउट है? डज एनीवन हैव एनी सॉर्ट ऑफ डाउट? तुम्हारे रूम पे तो क्या करेंगे? लाके दो तो खाएंगे. पर बेटा ये पोहे वाले चूड़ी की जो क्वांटिटी में बनाते ऐसी बात नहीं आती. मस्त बनाते एकदम. चलो 3 कंपनी बची है. तीनों कंपनी का डिस्कशन हम कल करेंगे. परसों से नया चैप्टर बीसीके का स्टार्ट करेंगे. वी विल बी नॉट स्टॉपिंग विद बीसीके. 31 मई तक टारगेट है की बीसीके का 40 मार्क पूरा कंप्लीट करेंगे. हर्षदा फडकर डाऊट नसेल तर चालेल, पण एक डब्बा चुडाचा घेऊन या बाबा. सेफ एंजॉय. बाय. वाह. अब मैं लेक्चर अकेले पढ़ा तो खा भी अकेले सकता हूँ ना मैं। बाय बाय।